Anyway, all right, calling to order the zoning bylaw committee meeting of November 9th, 2022. Roll call, alphabetical roll call attendance.
Clark Brewer here.
Tom Callahan here.
David Farag here.
Okay, we know Cassie will not be with us and Cassandra is with us tonight and Lauren is MIA, but that's okay. Everybody working hard. So, Clark, I don't know, did you get to watch the thing the other night? I knew it was a major screw up at the beginning.
I did not. I did go to bed though.
Well, I'll tell you, we got started like 20 minutes late because whatever that TV piece of equipment is in that room, it's got its own software and stuff, and it was getting updated as we started. And thankfully, Justin was able to get our third-party techie to get us connected, but it was 20 minutes past 7. I think we had about a dozen to 15 people on Zoom. We had a much smaller crowd. I don't know what the final number was, Cassandra, but there was a much smaller crowd. But, the people on Zoom was a lot of the same people who participated the last time. But I thought we had some pretty excellent presentations from Lauren, and we had somebody from MAPC to help her with some questions on the state stuff. And then the housing committee, the chair and vice chair gave their executive summary. And then Woody, I thought, did a really excellent presentation on the ADUs. So Dave, you were there. I mean, my takeaway is that we have to start thinking about what to do with the ADU bylaw. Obviously, it's there and we have to decide to keep it, reform it, do something. There was one member of the audience who caught me on the way in with some pejoratives about the MBTA mandate, but kept those comments to himself rather than say anything at the forum. But, I don't think we got a really strong sentiment one way or the other about the mandate. We didn't talk about too much about the penalty, of loss of grants. It was mentioned a little bit, but not extensively. We had one comment about, how to make ADUs count toward the, the subsidized housing inventory, SHI. We did a lot of acronyms the other night. And we explained the problem with the deed restrictions that you need to have to go along with that. But I think we got a sentiment to make the ADU work. We didn't get a strong sentiment about what position the town should take with the MBTA mandate. But I didn't get anybody and I whispered it to Lauren once. I said, I'm just surprised we don't hear from people saying, hey, we've never allowed multifamily, why start now? But I think everybody understood 40B and what we have to do with that. We got an explanation of why the friendly 40B on North Main Street isn't happening. And then later, 2 abutters came up and talked to Lauren and I. They're very concerned about that one. So, all in all, it was good and it was helpful. I just wish it had been better attended, and I don't know if the technical problems chased people away, but that was unfortunate. We got through it. Dave, I don't know.
I will watch it and be caught up at some point.
Yeah, it was, and then Lauren was, was very informative of where we stand with 40B and that we're in a safe harbor at the moment. Even anticipating the 2020 census, which hasn't been released yet. She did point out that the state, at least for purposes of the MBTA thing, is assuming we have 3,341 housing units. And we are, what was the number, Cassandra? I think 307 that we have. We look like right now
we're short by 30.
It looks like we're at 9.2%, but she also showed a chart where we have 45 units in the pipeline of various degrees of permitting. So, we will get to safe harbor. The housing, the mere existence of the housing production plan gives us some safe harbor as well.
That's right.
So, Dave, I don't know what thoughts you had about it.
Yeah, I have a few, if I could.
Sure.
The first thing is I thought it was great to level set with some of the background of 40B and 40R, 40S, all of those things to get everybody. And the great thing is for people who could not attend that, they can watch it afterwards on YouTube or otherwise at their leisure. I know myself, I catch a lot of meetings when I go hit the treadmill. I'll pop on a meeting or two that I think might be interesting, and I'll check it out. So that's always another possibility, just because we didn't get a big mass of people there. But regarding the substance, I thought what people have to understand is that unlike other things, it's we have to get into a safe harbor range, and we have to kind of stay there, and it's always a moving target. And when we're talking about the ADUs, which are a little bit different from that, I think to definitely try and look to reform the ADUs, and I think we have to look at beyond of saying, well, what do you like? We have to also look at the time we're going into, and that when the zoning bylaw gets implemented in some way, shape, or form over the next year or two, is that we are in a time period where normally you have a sort of a back and forth of a pendulum swinging of the economy, or when rates are low for mortgages, everyone's a developer, but we're in a high rate time. And for a quick statistic for you is that in the whole country, there's only 133,000 households that can refinance and get a less rate than they have today. That number 2 years ago was 19 million. So the refinances are not going to be happening. And I think what you're going to see is that people are going to be looking at their homes and be looking inward on what they're going to do. So the ADU is going to go, a new revised ADU could be a good possibility for people, as we were talking about, as people are going to age in their homes and want to stay there. It's going to provide a much better, more palatable menu choice for them. The idea that somebody is going to either downsize, sell, and then, well, what are you going to do when you get in the market? If you have to get a mortgage, it's now 2 or 3 times what it was a year ago if you have it. So I think it's going to constrict a lot of people in town for some of their options, and an ADU is going to work well. The one thing that was brought up at there was, and I know I talked with Tom afterwards, was regarding the ADUs, was something to do with the Airbnbs. You would have to have something, because the bylaw is currently silent on Airbnbs,
Right.
and I think that's going to be taken up with this bylaw as well coming up, and I think that's important. I don't think you could have ADUs without doing something about the Airbnbs, or you could have a whole mess on our hands around town. And then finally, with just looking for affordable housing, I didn't get a sense of where to really cite them. I know that was asked a number of times of where where would be the best parts of town or whatever to do them. I know the MBTA, you have to go within a certain area there, but I didn't get a sense from people of where some of the places would be the best, or where they'd be looking to do that. I know the Affordable Housing Committee is looking at, there's one-off things they can do where they can work on a piece of land, maybe get a couple units here or there. But I didn't get a general sense from the public of if there was an area in town that they were looking at that would be a really good place to do that. But other than that, I thought it was good, and there was a lot of information that was brought up to people that they might not have known, and it was an interesting conversation.
The best place to look is the zoning bylaw committee page.
Hey, on the Airbnb issue, that's been brought up from time to time, because there are some, summertime party house, huge, like, cost per day Airbnb rentals out there in town. But I still think it's a lot smaller than in other communities. Cambridge has regulated it to some extent, but complete non-regulation probably doesn't make sense. Hull, about 30 years ago, decided to ban anything less than 30-day rentals, and that changed their community significantly. The Airbnb there's a good and a bad side to it. It allows access to short-term rental for people that need it, visiting their family, visiting their sick cousin, whatever it is. So I think there's a good and a bad side to it, but we should certainly take a look at it
Yeah.
relative to the accessory dwelling unit as well, to see
Well,
if I mean,
when we
do
get to the
wanna
tape, yeah,
make
when
sure
we
that
get
it's
to the,
1 week rental or 1 month or on the harbor project, the Cove, I think we put in the decision that they can't do short-term rentals.
yes, we did.
It,
We did, and somebody mentioned at the meeting, I think it was Woody, I think he had a number that it's a relatively small number of people in Cohasset. I guess you can check ads who actually do Airbnb.
well, you
I
can
know
go on
some-
Airbnb and check what's available.
Yeah, I know somebody who's used one of the other companies. When we come up, fairly quickly, looking at the schedule, the uses in Article 4, we will need to decide this issue, and I think my draft bans it. Because I'm running into, when I see bylaws in other towns, I'm seeing mostly bans, outright bans of it. But we can debate that.
One thing I would put on the table is you have to remember pre-COVID in Cohasset had a very burgeoning wedding business in town that would go there, not just with the Red Line Inn, but when Atlantica was up and running, and the town was really, a wedding factory for, as far as for businesses. And and with Kimball's obviously been offline for a number of years now, and it's being a new project. There's not enough rooms for the weddings to have them. When you have a 200-person wedding in Cohasset, I mean, the Red Line Inn only has a few units, and they're going out of town. So if you loosen the screws on the ADUs and you get a lot more of them in town, you could be having a lot of that be filling it up if it was out there for those high for enterprising individuals. So I think that we have to be a lot careful that if we make ADUs easier to get and incentivize that, on the other end, we have to look at, well, the Airbnb has been kind of dormant and silent, that could give us something that we might not want.
Yeah. Well, we'll certainly debate that.
Something that's certainly related is right now you can have a guest house, provided that it's not that there's no remuneration involved. In some cases, to get the guest house built, a deed restriction has been applied by the building department. In other cases, it has not. You can, if your house was built before 55, you can make it a two-family. A legal two-family without.
Woody pointed that out to everybody, and I think people were surprised to hear that when Woody.
I mean, it's for older houses, not for newer houses. But my concern with this issue is that if there's a force in the market that wants to take place, and there's facilities for it, we should try to figure out a way to make it work for the town, neighborhoods, and individuals that can provide that, rather than having people sneak around and use backdoor methods for hiding their rentals, and then worrying about their neighbors. Hey, getting along with your neighbor, and the neighbor saw there's a new couple that went into they know I have an apartment. And I think it's bad for neighborhoods to not have a legal path for either short-term or long-term rentals. So I think it's worth getting into.
Okay, well, that's going to lead me into the Jack, by the way, just called me, and I think he couldn't find the link. I told him to go onto the committee's webpage so he can find it, but he's going to join us shortly. All right, so the agenda is kind of all mixed up now based on a lot of stuff that I either wrote or came in from town council today. So the next issue is an update on the first substantive articles we discussed. And it says approve a memo to council. Well, there's no memo to council. They got copied on everything I wrote today. But by surprise today, although told I shouldn't have been surprised because originally, supposedly, we set a deadline of tonight. You saw that Judge Cutler gave us her edits for Articles 1 and 12. And so, got those without enough time to really absorb them. I haven't read them all yet either. So that's something we'll take up at, which leads us to the two memos I did write. And let me bring the first, well, they were together in one document, but this was the latter of the memos, the two short ones. This is about the follow-up from these forums. And, from going way back to the working group, I've always thought that we should sub out work where we can and, try to get specific people to work on specific issues, because it's impossible for one person to do everything, impossible for town council to do everything. They really kind of need to know where we're coming from. So I put together these different issues that came out of the two forums that are anticipated to come out of the other forum we still have, and some other issues that we have out there, and trying to just make a determination of who wants to work on these and narrow our focus and to make suggested changes. Like, for example, Dave over the last week has shared more materials with me regarding mitigation and impact fees. And Lauren and Cassandra had put some materials together, and town council, I believe, gave us an email on the subject. So, we need to now just take that and start working. If that's a subject we want to address in the bylaw, it's now time to start digging into that and start drafting something or coming up with an idea. Because these particular topics that are up here, they're not pretty much not in my original draft as ideas. So I wanted to see if we could maybe assign everyone to tasks, or perhaps assign third-party expertise where we need it. Now, we all heard the issue of parking came up in the first forum. And as I said, it's not so much a bylaw problem as a location problem. And my first point was, should we as a committee formally suggest, as a result of that first forum, to the select board that they look into development of the additional parking in the village behind the Red Line and the Teen Center? I don't know if that's something we should take on our own, or Jack, when he's here, Jack's heard the same things we did. Maybe Jack will independently take it up, but it's not zoning per se, but it is a need that is coming out of, evident coming out of our forum and coming out of the work that, Clark and I are doing on the planning board and what he's doing on the zoning board. These issues are going to keep repeating. So does anybody have a strong feeling about not doing that, about not recommending that to the select board?
Well, the selectmen are going to say, so who pays for it? And,
well, that's
and we had talked about
the
sidewalk bank model, where if you're doing a development of a certain size, then you contribute to the parking bank.
Yeah, well, I think that the select board, that's for them to figure out. But I think what we heard, and to show too that to the community that we're listening to what we hear at these forums, we should at least take the step to put it on their radar and let them deal with it. I mean, it is going to be their issue to deal with. It's town land, it's town money, so they are going to ultimately have to deal with it. But I don't know if as a result of the first forum they are going to deal with it. But
So Tom, excuse me for interrupting, but that
right.
GERD offered to create parking on that site.
Did he?
Yeah, like 10 years ago.
And they didn't take him up on it.
And it was a companion to the 40 condos that he wanted to build in his upper back parking lot.
Always a hook.
And interestingly enough, the planning board was reviewing village bylaw application from GERD. And fortunately, at the last minute, the fire department stepped in and said the access to that for firefighting exceeds a 10% slope, so we can't get our fire equipment up there. So we denied their project, and they didn't appeal it.
Okay, well, and I don't know if we're going to see something like that similar return, but well, anyway, does anybody have a strong aversion
well,
to
Jack just came on now. Why don't we go right to the?
Yeah, Jack.
Yes.
We're discussing something I circulated today about following up on all the issues that came out of the forum and delegating some work for people to follow up with. And the first issue we're talking about is parking. And while it's not zoning specific, I was asking if anyone would object if this board, our board, formally asked the select board to look into, and that's all we could do, is ask you to look into developing the additional parking in the village behind the teen center. Now, do we have to ask you as a committee, or would you take that to the?
Well, you know, I can, you don't have to ask as a committee, but you know, I would strongly suggest that we stick to our focus that the select board has asked this zoning committee to do, and not go off on other things. I know there's a lot of people talking about parking and so-called parking task forces, et cetera, and so on. But I don't, you know, we have a very crucial zoning overhaul that needs to be done.
No, I don't. We're getting to that. I'm just saying.
Well, let's get that done. Yeah,
I want to be responsive. I also want to be responsive to the information and sentiments we're getting from the forums that we're conducting. But
Jack,
it is a non-zoning. Go ahead.
Related because in the village bylaw, we've been talking about creating a parking bank, like a sidewalk bank that other communities have. So large developments in the village can contribute to that, to create parking in this area. So it might be related to changes in the zoning bylaw.
If the zoning bylaw needed to address that, that would make, you know, under that, but to go ahead and say, well, this zoning bylaw committee is, because somebody said there's a parking issue, which we all know there is, and then the zoning bylaw committee needs to go out and figure out what to do on the hillside, you know, over there. That's way beyond the charge of this zoning.
It might actually fit better with the planning board.
One,
It might fit better with the planning board's.
You're right, Clark.
Goals and
Maybe
interests.
maybe we'll take that up in the planning board meeting next week.
yeah, I mean, we really
right.
have got a pretty major thing to do, and I think we're gonna have enough work to do to get this done. I wouldn't roll it out down the
All right.
line for now.
Let me move along since there's a lot of material to cover. So the part of parking that is a zoning issue is the regulations that we have within the bylaw. And I was discussing this with Lauren, and we had discussed it in the past when Stantec came along and submitted a bid to this committee to do some work. Do we want to retain an expert to look at our current parking regulations, specifically the size of spaces and the number of spaces needed per use, and see if that needs to be updated? And I don't know if somebody here is capable of surveying other town bylaws and see what the state of the art is. I think we would go to an expert to get a really quick answer on that. But does anybody think that's needed, number one? Or because, at the moment, we haven't gotten to the part of the diagnostic about parking, but at the moment, there's no changes proposed for our parking bylaw at the moment. So the question is, do we want to just make sure we're at the current state of the art or not?
I think it
Is
makes
that-
sense to if we can get an expert to take a look at that part of our bylaw.
I don't
that
think
would
that
be
would
great.
hurt. The
I
only.
have
Yeah, go ahead.
noticed that, there are some things that are missing in our parking. For example, some projects don't use um, a side distance from a parking spot that is really needed. If it's an end, like an end parking spot, needs a little bit more room than the actual standard parking space to aid in getting in and out of cars and navigation. So when you see proposals where there's a wall right at the parking spot size, that doesn't quite work well in reality. It ends up damaging buildings and damaging car doors, and making it very inconvenient. I know I did a parking garage for the town of Wells in the town of Wellesley, and they killed the end parking spots and said, you got to use that for extra turning radius, not an extra parking spot. Which, when you're doing a project, you're fighting for every single parking spot that can possibly fit. So that was
Okay,
something
right.
that,
One thing, Tom, I think on that, while I don't think it's a problem, I don't have a problem with that, but what I've noticed is that the parking rules on the books in not only here but in other towns is when you get to the reality of the size of the vehicle that goes in that space, the two are not together congruent. And so what you end up having is parking regs on the books that say you need so many spaces for this, that, and the other thing. For the person doing the project, the parking is just an afterthought, and then the size of the spaces that end up getting there because they were on the books for 30 years, they end up being too small for a Suburban or Lincoln Navigator or whatever people are driving these days. So I think the size of spaces is an issue a lot of times.
That came up. That was discussed when we were discussing 55 South Main Street at the planning board last week, and I believe our bylaw does require a minimum width to a space, but again, it's been there for a while. What's the current state of the art? Is it 10 feet? Is it 8 feet, 6 feet? So all right, I'll work with Lauren, because there was money in the budget for a parking study based originally on Stantec's, to follow up to Stantec's bid. So we'll talk about getting that. I think that would be a really short exercise for somebody to do, to just
not
vet
too
that.
involved.
Yeah. Any sentiment about, I didn't hear this at the forum, but is there any sentiment? I guess the answer to the next bullet is no. The village provision that allows you to use the town lot towards your parking requirements. I think until we look at the village more holistically, we're not there to look at that yet. Design came up, and then if you saw 143 this week, there was more fresh bashing of the mixed-use building at the Stop and Shop Plaza. I think we got in a sentiment to expand the design guidelines to 3A. But then the question
Absolutely.
is, do we make the guidelines a regulation, which might be a little stronger? And the text of the guidelines is only, 4 years old, Clark? Do we need to make any changes? Because the
guidelines go back to the village, the original village.
So I don't know if anyone would
bylaw.
like to take on a review of the design guidelines, and in all of these cases, I'm looking with whoever's going to take these on as sort of a subcommittee of one or two. You'll work with town council probably for communication. It would be routed through me, or at least I'd be copied on an email, so town council isn't being bombarded from a zillion places. But anybody want to take a look at Clark? I don't know. Clark, I got a number of tasks for you, Clark. So I don't know how much you want to take on.
I mean, the design guidelines are the kind of thing that I use on projects anyway. Relative to 3A, I think that 3A could learn a lot from what we have in our village and Harbor Village guidelines. But there might be, you know, a whole nother kind of approach to 3A design guidelines and 50-mile-an-hour traffic than we would have at the village. So it could be pared down or expanded in some
Well,
ways.
I would say one thing on this is that whether the mechanism, whether it's regulations or otherwise, or just guidelines, is they either have to be implemented or they have to be there with the first set of whatever we're asking town meeting to do, so that it's either been passed or it will be passed at the first
Right.
stroke that they get. It cannot be, we're putting that off till the next thing, because that, as you can see, not only with what you're seeing on Facebook or whatever, that is in the forefront of people's minds, is the design guidelines, what they've seen. And of course, you're always fighting the last war, whatever the last project is what people
Right,
are gonna,
right.
it'd be in the front of their minds. But if you look at 3A, if you look at the TOD district, which is next to the MBTA lot, when that building was created, it was done, you know, in a very tasteful way. It's within the town character. You have a multi-mixed use there. You've got retail on the first floor, apartments on the second floor. It fits in with the town, you know, very easily as a new development. Other buildings that have been built since then have not on 3A. And those definitely have to be more in the style of that, whether it's colonial, federal, or whatever. Clark can probably speak to the different types that would fit in this town more. And then the same thing with the village. Those village guidelines have to be just tweaked a little bit so it tightens them up. And then we don't have, you know, what had happened before, where a project came in, was going to build a building that looked like it belonged in Somerville. And then it wasn't until, you know, everyone had a little uprising there that got changed. So I think that has to be front and center, either finished or on the first pallet that we have for people to vote at a town meeting.
Right, well, going along, you know, again, because if we change them to regulations, there's no, you know, we're not tied to the town meeting schedule. The planning board just has to do it with a public hearing. We are going to be making changes that we've discussed before about moving a lot of application administrative stuff out into regulations. So that can be done then. And that the timing for that would either be right before town meeting, anticipating changes, or right after. So I'll leave this open for the issue of who wants to take on a volunteer, because it's not really tied so much to the town meeting schedule. And by the way, most
I'll
of
take
these
a look at
issues,
it.
good. All right. And most of these issues that we're talking about that arose out of the forum are substantive change issues that would probably be dealt with in the fall town meeting, not the spring, unless we decide to advance some of those, which we'll get to in a moment. So, you know, your timeline of research is going to be a little longer than necessarily having to be ready for Springtown meeting.
One quick thing. I was going to say, yeah. Clark is taking on, but I'll jump on with that with Clark if he wants to help.
Okay.
On the guidelines.
All right.
Sounds great.
All right. Well, the next issue, Dave, you kind of, by doing some research on your own, have kind of volunteered yourself to be the subcommittee on the next one. Assuming for the moment, you know, we're not making the substantive decision yet whether we want to put in a bylaw on mitigation and impact fees. But as I said earlier, Lauren had gathered a lot of materials. I believe town council gave us an email on the subject, and Dave researched some materials the other day. So in fine tuning this to an actual proposal for addition to the bylaw, since Dave, you've already taken an initiative, I was wondering if you'd want to be the subcommittee to run with the ball on this one.
Yes, no, that's fine. If anyone else wants to jump on with that too. The one, you know, there's a number of different ways to do it, but I think we might also need, you know, I know Jack's here, but with a selectman of what we can talk regarding it about what would make sense, you know, and what it would dive into, whether it would go into a potential sidewalk fund for particular projects. And again, it's not every project. It would be ones that would sort of hit the trip wire and be big enough to do it. But we can talk about that, because that's gonna help with what the design of it would be, really,
Yeah.
is what
And,
you're.
and this is one in particular, you'll work closely with town council back and forth,
Yeah.
because they can also just quickly pick from other communities that they know that have these things.
Yeah, and I
Um,
think it's something that I've had a lot of experience in actually implementing them and in the past from a community's perspective. So I don't want to get too much out of my bandwidth, which is
Yeah.
pretty stretched already. But David, keep me posted, and I
Yeah.
will be available anytime you want to call me and on this,
Okay.
because I think this is important.
Yeah,
The-
and I
the other-
think this,
Yeah.
I think this is, unless you think you can put something together by like, the articles need to be written for the Springtown meeting, probably end of February. So unless you put something together by then, this is something you could target for fall 23 town meeting.
Yeah.
So no particular rush. It depends if you want to bring it forward sooner.
Yeah, and the thing is, I've seen with other meetings in the town, and that when they're talking about sidewalks, they're talking about things that they're looking to do. It's $1 million or whatever for a fully paved 1 mile sidewalk that's handicap accessible. So it ends up being about $190 a foot. So anything you can get out of, whether it's a mitigation or impact fee, or whether it's the having the project build the sidewalks around the project that they have, either or, every foot counts. So I think that's something to really look into, because it's badly needed in all sorts of aspects of the town.
Well, generally speaking, what you look to the developers, you say, any impact, anything that the town or community has to do to adapt to your proposal, they have to pay for. Like, for instance, if they put something there that now creates a need for the sidewalk, they can't just say, well, I'll put a sidewalk in front of my building. No, if it requires a need for a sidewalk, they have to sidewalk the area. So that's that's the day one of mitigation, and that's why it's called mitigation. You have to mitigate any impact of your development on the community at large.
All right, Dave, from this point forward, that's your baby to run with, okay? All right, from the second forum, we discussed earlier the ADUs, and I think, Jack, before you got here, we discussed that there seems to be a sentiment to work towards some reforms. I would like to ask Woody, since he did such an excellent presentation and has researched the issue, to take the lead on this one if he's willing. Again, this I think will work closely with KP because they'll have examples from other communities. Clark, given some of the other topics, I'm looking at you taking the lead on. This might tie into that, in terms of the housing production plan and cottage-like development, tiny house development, low impact development. So you might be in the back. If let me see if Woody is willing to take this the next step to start.
Could I make a comment? I
Yeah.
think that whatever that organization, I keep getting the acronym incorrect. I think that they're doing a lot on that. It's too bad that they can't start developing some model, model regulations or to just.
Who's
MBTA?
MAPC? You mean? MAPC?
Yes.
Yeah.
NAPC, right.
Yeah, I
They're
don't.
doing that North Shore, and it would seem that they should have a model regulation.
Yeah, there is a new model bylaw on it, and I believe somebody had told me once that the town or city of Arlington has passed it. The version that I always, no, I'm thinking of something else. Never mind. So there is one out there, and I think this is where we have the interaction of Lauren to go to MAPC and get help. But we have to make sure we're not paying for MAPC's help because there's budget issues to think about.
No,
All
we
right,
just
so
asked Lauren, do they?
I'll ask Lauren
model
and then have Lauren MAPC help as well. with council. All right, so we know we want.
Ask if they have a model.
Yeah, no, there
ordinance.
is. There's a new model out there. The
That's
MBTA
good.
mandate
No.
issue, again, Jack, when we were going over the forum, we didn't discuss the possible penalties if the town decides not to comply. We didn't seem to get a strong, at least publicly stated, sentiments about this mandate one way or the other. I said that before the meeting. One of the attendees told me privately what they thought of it, and I think that a lot of people privately think it's not a great idea. But here's the thing, we're charged with writing a bylaw for it. And the proposal I put out there, and I think just in the general of following up in the housing production plan, we are looking probably at creating some area in town where multifamily can be developed. But whether we develop it under our current dimensional requirements or follow the MBTAs are two different things. And, we can allow for multifamily and create a district when we do Articles 3 and 4 this spring. And then if we decide to adhere to the MBTA thing, we can amend it again. But the real threshold decision here, I think, is on your board, Jack. Are we
I was
going
about to bring that.
Yeah, are we
There is
going to
down
comply
on the
with this or
board.
not? Are we going to comply with this or
Well-
not? Because then it tells this committee how we write the bylaw and what we need to write. So I'd like to kick this particular issue to
Yeah.
your board right now.
Yeah, I was just gonna, I don't know when we'll be prepared to do this, but I know that there has been sentiment expressed that it looks like the penalties or the rewards for compliance are so minimal to what they would benefit Cohasset. Cohasset's a wealthy community. We're not going to get any of these
Right.
benefits anyway, or if they are, they'll be de minimis. So why do we want to change our whole town around? So we may just say, thank you. We're not gonna, we're just not interested in.
I think for going forward, as we look at Articles 3 and 4, which are probably on our reform, on the subjects of the Springtown meeting, we just go ahead and do what we want to do as this committee without regard to the MBTA thing. But, we can change it, amend it again if we need to comply with MBTA. But that's a policy decision that's beyond the zoning board,
Yes,
zoning
it
bylaw
is.
committee, the planning board. That's for you as executive authority to decide. But it would be helpful if we knew sooner rather than later what direction you'd like to go,
Well,
so that then we can create
Our,
the appropriate bylaw.
our timing is that we have some
Whatever.
pretty significant things going on short term on this NAV bylaw and all that. So I don't know when we can get it before, but do we know what the penalties really are? I've heard different
Well,
descriptions of penalties.
Three grants were mentioned, and the one that I was most familiar was Mass Works, which we recently applied for with regard to Elm Street and were turned down. Mass Works used to be called PWEDs, and we did get a PWED grant for the village when the train came, but that was part of our mitigation deal that the MBTA made a PWED grant happen for us that we probably, if we had applied for it on our own, wouldn't have gotten. But I don't know how many Mass Works grants we've ever gotten, but that's, I think, the main one that we tend to seek from time to time. So anyway, we'll leave that issue. I mean, we will
If
go
anybody
ahead.
finds out what the penalties actually are or
Right.
that
We
benefit,
will, we as
Let
a
me-
committee, we as a committee will go ahead with whatever we're going to do in multifamily housing for the
Yes.
Springtown meeting. And this decision and whether we make any changes to comply with this mandate would be a fall town meeting
Yeah.
issue. So
I do think
let's
it needs to be monitored in the background, like with Selectmen and Lauren. Lauren is pretty plugged into all the grants too.
Oh, yeah, she's
and-
on top of it.
And the thing is I don't think you need a crystal ball to know that what's going to happen is even if the penalties are small now, those are going to be increased over time to end up getting compliance. And there was a recent study done, which they do yearly by the Boston Foundation regarding housing. And it says it just exactly what you would think it would say, is that there's not enough. And the housing in Boston, apartment wise, is now topping San Francisco as one of the tops in the country. So, you know, the pressure is going to be put on, and it's going to be open season on the suburbs to try and get more housing. I think that's, whether it happens this year, next year, whenever, I think you can see that coming over the hill, that's what's going to be, we're going to be faced with as time goes on.
Yep. All right, well,
Question is whether-
I'm sure Lauren and Cassandra are going to keep on top of this one, because the implementing regulations are still a moving target. They haven't been finalized. And as Lauren mentioned the other night, you know, we originally were looking at creating zoning for 750 units, and we're down to around 510 at the moment. But, you know, who knows? You know, and I would like to think at some point they'll give us credit if we do bring in multifamily zoning on our own terms, that they'll give us some consideration for that. Next two bullets are kind of tied together, and this is where I was looking at Clark taking a lead. So in the next forum, Clark is going to be speaking to low impact development, green development, that kind of thing. And Clark, we need your materials, your proposed materials on that by Thanksgiving, if that's okay.
Sure, no problem.
And you know, a few slides. Again, your presentation is 10-15 minutes like the others have been. But the follow-up to that, and tied into what we saw from the housing production plan, is, you know, are we going to do different types of housing, this cottage style, this tiny house thing?
Yeah, I don't like the term tiny house because
Well, whatever, you
it
know
ends
what
up
I
being
mean.
trailers.
Yeah,
But
you know what I mean.
cottage style and pocket neighborhoods.
Right. So, nobody brought up our cluster bylaw except in the diagnostic. KP mentioned that we should take it out of Article 3 because it's not really an overlay district, but nobody discussed our current cluster bylaw in connection with the housing production plan. So in terms of zoning, I think, Clark, when you're looking at this, you're looking at not only our cluster development bylaw, which is what, Article, it's 9 or 10. You're looking at all of this. So I'd like you to take the lead on this with the likely, again, this is probably an issue that you know, we are going to try to deal with uses in the Springtown meeting, but it's probably more of a fall town meeting issue, particularly if it needs some significant research. And I will tell you that the other day, yesterday, Lauren and I spoke with a developer's representative on another project in the village who's looking for ideas. And we actually suggested the cottage style housing to them to create as low as impact on this particular site. I won't say what the site is, but as possible, because there's traffic and access issues, there's abutter concerns, blah, blah, blah. So, you know, we may have an opportunity even before even before we reform or write a bylaw on this subject, that in the context of the village, we might have a project that kind of brings this kind of development to the forefront. So we'll see, but we did suggest it as an idea.
Yeah, and I pushed the concept with the guys that did the duplexes, but they just didn't want to. They just wanted to. They didn't want to do any more design. They just wanted to use a standard duplex, colonial box.
Right. And that's exactly what this developer's representative said as well. This think duplex. It's in a part of the village that is allowed to be all residential, and you know, just a very, very preliminary discussion with staff that and we were just trying to throw out some ideas. But all right, if Clark, you know, if you take the lead with the whole concept of low impact and alternative housing, we'll call it.
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, a smaller house has less impact on the environment, but it also, for the village, allows a lot more flexibility in terms of siting than the big building.
Right. And if you think you'd like to get some help from, you know, the Affordable Housing Committee, Town Council, whatever, just say so. We can ask them to get all of them to get more involved. I think, you know, they gave us the executive summary of the housing production plan. I would like to think they have some actual ideas of what it is they'd like to see, and the Affordable Housing Committee might not be experts on bylaw writing, but they can certainly give us ideas and concepts that they have in mind.
Well, the thing about sustainable design, just to quickly, the thing about sustainable design is that it lowers your operating costs. And it has a perfect fit with affordable housing, which should be affordable to operate as well as affordable to acquire.
Okay, you're absolutely right, and that's why we were kind of trying to push this one developer the other day into that direction. It makes sense all the way around.
Well, one thing to think about as well is that when you're talking about having a more modest size of home, whatever that ends up being, is that there has to be some sort of incentive with it to build it, built into the bylaw, because if you have the menu option of, well, I can build a smaller style house or whatever, or I can, build a duplex or something, they're going to try and developers going to look at it and say, what is the biggest thing I can fit there that will make the most money? And
Right.
and so they're going to say, what can I do as of right, volume wise, on a particular site, or by special permit. And so they're going to look at that first to say what's the biggest thing I can get in there, the most square footage, because every square footage is X amount per square foot that they're going to get back on a return. So if there is another option that's smaller, that's going to be more reasonably priced, there needs to be some other incentive to do that. Whether it's a faster permitting process or something like that, there's got to be some hook there that would make a developer look at that and say that this might be advantageous.
Yeah,
Well, you have to show with examples that the density that the density that is required for the economics, it can be done in a well-designed way instead of the big ugly box.
And Woody mentioned incentivizing ADUs too in his presentation the other night. And that was the thinking beyond cluster bylaws to begin with, was to try to give them an economic incentive to do more units that they could sell or rent, but in a more compact area for the benefit of the environment. So it's not new thinking, but I think to get really wholesale changes, at least in the short term, communities and governments are going to have to incentivize total change. Because for the Clark, also, there was discussion about how much single family development we've had over the last 20 years. Woody brought out some statistics about that and how large the houses are too. So we do have to do a lot of change of thinking in this town. From the forum, we also are going to be probably looking at developing a climate change resiliency type of bylaw. We first have to see who we're lining up for speakers on that.
Wasn't Tom Bell going to do that?
Tom Bell is going to talk. We have to nail down that he's committed to participating, but he's probably, I'm getting from the exchange of emails, he might be more on the science than on bylaws. But we talked to MAPC the other night. They have somebody's on this. There are a few different model bylaws out there. Audubon has one, and MAPC helped Audubon write it. So we're trying to bring in, like we did for the housing one the other night, bring in somebody from MAPC to be a co-speaker. And that may be one as we go down the road, and this would definitely be a fall 23 target, is probably look a lot towards MAPC for expertise on that. I don't know any community in the Commonwealth that's yet passed any kind of bylaw in that direction. I can't speak to other states, but they would probably be more tuned into that than even town council would be. So that'll be down the pike. And then to the extent we're going to deal with the land alteration bylaw any further, I would suggest some changes on that. I'm basically going back to its original draft, not to what it is today, but that too would be a full project.
Was there anything in particular on the land alteration bylaw that
we made
that seems not to work?
Actually, we've only had we had the one project at Howard Gleason Road that involved it so far. And actually, we got a pretty innovative solution to the issue. They wanted to remove some visible ledge. The bylaw would prevented them from doing that, but what they offered us was to uncover ledge that is now under the soil in different places at a 2-to-1 ratio. So they kind of took a wetlands approach that if you fill wetlands, you have to replicate them 2-to-1. I thought that was an interesting approach to solving the problem, but no, we haven't confronted problems with it yet. It's just that we made a lot of compromises to get the thing passed, and it's not as widely applicable as it could be. The other issues, looking ahead, substantive issues, we've talked about the single lot exemption. I've already asked Woody and his board to look into this. Need to ask them if they're going to have something ready for spring or for fall. I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts on that, but you know, this draft where I put out the basically four choices that are available to us with our current single lot exemption, which is unique in the Commonwealth.
With all the forums that we've got going, I think after the last one, we should look at doing one regarding residential. And that might fall, but that would fall into it, the single lot. So areas, dimensions, think that would fall into that forum at that point to see, you know, to get a feel from the public.
We get to the other memo on the schedule, we'll talk about that. But again, it's kind of up to ZBA at this point. It's in their lap about how quickly they want to bring any change forward. And again, I haven't read the part of the diagnostic that discusses it, but I'm sure Carol has some thoughts on it. I got to share that with Woody too, but that's another issue. So that's kind of subbed out already. The solar and wind articles, Carol, and I noticed when I was going through the diagnostic regarding Article 4 in the table of uses, she mentioned something about the solar thing about, you know, we restrict it too much to certain properties when we're not supposed to do that, and we don't say that it can be used in residential, although solar is used in residential. And I had actually wrote changes for that. But I'm thinking, and I've always thought that maybe we should first sub out these two articles to the alternate energy committee since they wrote them. Give them Carolyn's diagnostic comments, give them my proposed change, and let them come up with some suggested changes for the fall town meeting next year.
Not a bad first place to start. Yeah.
Yeah, all right. The table of area regulations, this is the
Hey, Tom, you're breaking up for some reason. Is it your proximity to the microphone or?
It's right in front of me. It's Beechwood. It's the Beechwood curse. The table of area.
Fine, and then other times you're all broken up.
Yeah, all right. Well, I'll try to.
Good right now.
I'll try to be loud. So on the table of area regulations, this is probably where, if anywhere, there will be substantive change, this is where it would come. Either in the area of dealing with frontage and setbacks and area, or dealing with maximum size of houses. And the working group had done a lot of research about house sizes. Some of that data about the growth of Cohasset since 2000 was revealed at the forum the other night. We have some other data that had been developed. What we have not researched, though, yet, and this is where, you know, again, this would be a target for the fall town meeting, so we have some time. But what we do not have data on is what would happen if we departed from our current 50-foot frontage and use of pork chop lots, which is not typical suburban, and which we changed to in 1969 for some reason. And we went back to suburban frontage and suburban things of that sort. We need a study of that. And I think that's an expert. An expert has to identify an open piece of property in town and say, okay, under your current zoning, this many lots would get in. If you did suburban frontage like 100, 150 feet, and you had to do a subdivision with a subdivision road, this is what would be developed. It somewhat ties into Clark low impact development because I think, you know, if you go this current subdivision route with a big road and infrastructure, is that low impact? You know, I think this will all tie together. But we do not have any data comparing any particular parcel in town or area of town to make that comparison. And I think if we are to propose any changes in this area, we would have to back that up with some data and some examples. Now, we have an active project in the planning board that may give us a real world example, but rather than count on that, I'd rather see if it's in the budget to commission, again, either the Weston and Sampson, some of the experts we use, to maybe do this kind of study so that we have the backup data and we can make an intelligent decision. Do we switch frontage or do we not? So that's my recommendation, that we shop that out and find money in the budget to do that, with the target of having something for the fall town meeting.
That sounds good. I mean, there's other towns have density bonus, transfer development rights, things like that. I've always thought that with a low impact development, if a developer chose to, instead of just making a curvy street where every house and most of the garages face south, that they design their future house footprint so that they maximize the potential for solar gain, rooftop solar panels, that you could incentivize that, something that they should probably do anyway, by doing a allowing like a 10% increase in lot density. Again, we if possible, we want to encourage behavior that's gonna help these new neighborhoods long term, and a density bonus is a way to do that.
Okay. So this is where
I got something on this.
Yeah,
I would-
okay, go ahead.
I would say that I don't have an issue with it, but I think a picture is worth 1,000 words, and
It is.
the data is important. But if you remember, when the village bylaw was done, one of the reasons that it was able to be passed was that people saw with pictures what a new development would look like in the village if the bylaw passed.
Yeah, there were a
And
bunch of test fits that.
Yes,
that
and that
were
was
done.
huge. That was the reason the bylaw gets passed. If we just come in with area dimensions or different changes in the bylaw, to everybody, that's just a bunch of government gobbledygook. The
I
proof
agree
in the
with your
pudding,
point.
the proof in the pudding is going to be in the pictures of here's what it is today, and this is what it would be after the change for the most basic of lots. That's the most important thing. Yep.
Wholeheartedly agree. And the working group never got to that point, or we didn't have the internal expertise. I mean, on the working group, we did the research, and I think Cassie's not here, but she needs to take credit. Katie, if we decide to do something about regulating house size, we have clear data of showing pre-2000 growth and house size versus post-2000 growth and house size. So we have that data. We'll be able to show people what the impact has been going. Tie that in with arguments about, we should have more low impact development, more environmentally friendly houses. We'll be able to make that case should we choose to want to make it. This one we don't, and we really need it. So you brought up some issues though related to it, Clark, that I hadn't thought of. I'm just looking at this as straight. What happens when you change frontage from 50 to 150? I think since we have a little time, if anyone has any ideas of what would go into the scope of work that we would hire an expert to do this analysis, make those suggestions. Let's shoot for early December to have any suggestions on that, and then we can commission this out. Again, that'll give us, Lauren, time to look if there's money in the budget for this and where it would come from. And then we can get somebody to research this for us and give us the data so that we can make intelligent decisions. So you seem to have some ideas, Clark. So anybody who's got ideas of what the scope of work should entail, but specifically we're looking, if you look at the table of area regulations, we're looking at the residential districts, the left side of the table, which is area, frontage, setbacks, Height's right in the middle. Yeah, probably won't deal with height, but those are the dimensions that we'd be looking at.
Hey, Tom, what do you know about how the residential districts were created back in 55 or whenever it was, our first zoning map? Because I don't think those edges have changed very much.
No, I don't think the boundaries have changed, but what we, on the working group, what we determined is that there was a major change in 1969. Or
For the map?
68 or 6, no, the map didn't change, but I think
Okay.
the lot areas may have changed.
Right,
And
right.
that's when we switched to 50-foot frontage, and we did have frontages of 100 feet. I think the maximum maybe for residence C was 150 feet.
But it's a
And
little
then
bit
in-
more, it's a
in
more
80s
complex exercise to ask, are the residential zone boundaries correct? I mean, my house is in a residence A,
Yeah,
like as if it was, you know, in or around the village. But it really isn't.
right.
I'm just using it as an example.
No, I'll tell you that. So and then what I can gather in the major change in 86 was the current lot area, minimum lot areas we have in the 3 districts were changed then to what they are today. And I don't recall exactly what they were before. But no one in the 2 years the working group's been looking at this, no one has suggested changing any boundaries of the residential districts, but we could.
It might be something to look at.
Okay, all right. Well, again, let's gather suggestions everybody has on a scope of work, so that we know everything we'd want to have looked into before we send it out to bid, and then we can budget it and see
And
what.
hey, Tom, one other thing. What about having zoning setbacks for, you know, existing residential structures and new proposed subdivisions that are different? Because right now, your zoning is basically set up that sort of penalizes the existing houses and sets you know, pretty extensive setbacks for any new stuff. But there's always been that that problem of zoning where, I mean, all 60% of the lots are non-conforming by size. Okay, those are existing lots with houses on them, doesn't
Yeah.
matter. But if you actually overlay the setback non-conforming aspects, you come up with a lot more existing non-conforming than 60%. You know, it might be 80 or 90%, especially of
So what are you
pre-zoning
saying?
structures.
What are you saying? If something new was built next to an existing non-conforming by setback, you would let them.
Well, I guess I'm thinking of
You'd
like
let them become
planned development, like a subdivision.
Yeah.
Might have different rules than an infill or an existing non-conforming structure. I mean, I'm basically thinking residential structures or
Yeah, I
single-family
hear
houses.
what you're doing. All right, I hear that. Put that in your
It's a
suggestions
thought.
of the possible. Yeah, put it in. And that reminds me on the setbacks, I didn't put in this memo in my haste of doing it this morning was, came up in Forum 1 was village setbacks between the, at the boundary of the village district and the residential district. I don't know if that needs a lot of study. I think it's just settling on a number.
You mean the transition zone?
Yeah, a transition zone, a buffer zone of, where we have maybe a greater setback and a lesser height limit. But I think when we get to.
Well, the big question was, do we take it out of the village or do we take it outside of the village? Or do we take it from inside the village?
Oh, yeah.
Or
yeah.
is the transition outside? That's
well,
just something
and
to
that
kick
kind
around.
of that kind of setback qualification would be in the table of area regulations. So it is a fall issue. So we can put that off for the moment. But you're right. You're should the setback be in the village side of the line or the residential or both? You know, that's, all right. Well, the issue with that though is assume the residential structure is already there. You know, we're looking at new construction in the village that's coming up to the boundary line. That's, so I think any change would be falling on the village property to comply.
Sure, but it wouldn't be that hard to see what 100-foot looks like outside the village and what 100-foot looks like inside the village. And
Yeah.
I mean, does it affect 10 structures or is it 3?
Right. Okay. All right. So that is that memo. Moving along, I wanted to get to this other longer one about what we're looking at now that we have the forums under our belt for the third one is coming up. It's Monday the 5th, by the way. So we now have to really start getting into directing our efforts towards May 23's town meeting. As we've discussed, the objective is for organizational change and perhaps some substantive change. And this is a plan of action. So what we've already distributed discussion documents on Articles 1, 12, and 13. We did some feedback. And as I said today, Jack, before you got here, today we got from KP, Judge Cutler's comments and rewrites.
Yes.
So, some of the deliverables that's further down this document, she did. She'd said that, our follow-up notes said do it by November 9th, but since I hadn't heard from her until late this morning, I didn't know it was coming. So we do now have the work to go ahead and do the rewrites and make some votes and decisions. Today or yesterday, last meeting, I distributed a discussion document for the definitions. And the other day I distributed ones for Article 3, which is the districts, and Article 4, which is the uses and the table. So looking ahead at our schedule, we are meeting tonight. We have November 30th and December 19th. I'm going to try to make sure town council is there. And given that we are looking at an overall goal of having target late February to have all the articles written for the warrant, and that's Lauren and I guessing right now that that's when they need to be ready. So our meetings in November 30th, December, and the 2 that we have in January, and however many we have in early February, that's where we're going to be making some substantive decisions and getting these articles in shape and ready. I am suggesting that we plan to have a public forum on the articles in February when they're ready, when they're first drafted. One, I think it would be helpful to have that forum and give and take with the community, and other than a town meeting setting where you're presenting something that this is it, vote yes or no, that we can have some discussion, feedback, and February gives us some time to make some changes. The planning board Section 5 hearings that are mandatory would be probably in March. Again, the feedback from the planning board will give us more opportunity to make some changes before these things have to go to a printer. Again, if we need another public forum, and a second forum before town meeting might discuss all the articles as a whole, or if we do bring some substantive changes. For example, let's say the ZBA says, yes, go ahead with a change to single lot exemption in the spring. Or Dave says, we're ready to go ahead with proposing something on impact fees and mitigation. Okay, those might be specific ones since they would involve substantial change that we might have a pre-town meeting forum on, rather than looking at the whole warrant. But we can decide that as needed when we go. And then the usual vetting when you go around to the other boards would probably be in April, with town meeting sometime in May. Looking ahead at a forum schedule, so we have our third of our focused forums this December. February and perhaps April, we would have a pre-town meeting forums on the warrant articles. And then looking ahead to the fall town meeting, we would continue to do issue-focused forums beginning sometime after town meeting. And any proposed changes to residential development or Article 5, or bringing in low impact development, climate resiliency, change to single lot exemption if we don't do it in the spring, et cetera, et cetera. We will have a number of topics that would be for the fall town meeting that we would continue to do our forums through the summer of next year. So in that time frame, we have some decisions. First, we have to make an organizational decision for the spring town meeting. Are we reorganizing the bylaw into 9 articles, which is my proposal, or the working group's proposal, which came from the Concord bylaw model? Or are we following KPs, which is pretty much to keep what we have because it's traditional and it's the way all bylaws look? Although, again, Concord's looks like what the working group proposed. Or are we doing some hybrid of the two? So, you know, at our meeting, either the 11:30 or 12:19, we got to make that decision because that determines how we are writing the articles and writing the bylaw.
Well, Tom, when we discuss this, and this ties into some of the other comments earlier about, well, we need assistance and do we hire a consultant to do this and that. One of the things that by getting KP Law involved instead of some of the very expensive proposals that we looked at 2 years ago, is to kind of say, look, that's our law firm. They do this a lot. They have Judge Cutler, excuse me. If they can get this done, because I'm very conscious of all the work that all of you guys are doing, and in particular you, Tom. And one of the things by bringing KP Law in was to take some of the burden off of citizens.
And
So
they've already done that. They've
Yeah.
already done that by giving us deliverables today. That's actually 2 weeks ahead of this schedule that I'm
Good.
showing you. So we already have some of their deliverable
Yeah.
work. And I'm not going to sit here and go to the mat and be insulted if they're ignoring everything I wrote. But you know, I will make my arguments for organizational clarity, and they'll make theirs, and we'll just make decisions and go.
Okay,
forward.
that's fine.
But
I just wanted you to know.
So
That's a
this got,
reasonable approach.
yeah,
That's a reasonable approach,
this
Tom.
got circulated
Yeah.
to them today. Originally on the agenda, I was thinking we'd vote on a memo to send to them because I didn't expect deliverables when I was starting to write this. I didn't know we were going to get them an hour later. But they've seen this. This was circulated to them today as well. I just want to make sure that they're here at our meetings on November 30th, December 19th, and probably at some of the January ones, because they need to be here to help us make these decisions. And where we have questions on their proposed text changes and organizational suggestions, we need to do that. So
Yeah.
a deliverable that they have to come up with quickly is we need a transition provision. We are going to be dealing with a bylaw being reformed in 2 parts. We are probably in this first step dealing with definitions. We are probably dealing with uses, yet we are not dealing with dimensions. We are not dealing with other parts of the bylaw that have referenced definitions that may or may be changing, may be eliminated. So we do have to have a transitional one. I had drafted one. It's probably not the right thing to do, but KP will see this. We will need a transitional article that has to be part. So how the town will deal with the bylaw, in the months between the first round of changes and the second round of changes. And they would know better how you get that past the AG, because I'm sure we're not the only town in the world that does it in steps. The demo delay issue and decision 2, deliverable 2. I got the sense that we want to have demo delay, but KP says anything without the historical districts or demo delay should go in the general bylaw, and we can propose a general bylaw. I just at this point would want KP to suggest a text. My proposal on demo delay is based on Norwell's bylaw in 2005. I understand even Norwell has updated that bylaw. There is a new state-of-the-art demo delay. Cassandra, I don't know if you're still out there. Somebody, just Cassandra or Lauren, just did a little survey from other towns about their. Yeah, did you just get us a little survey from some other towns about their experience with demo delay?
Sort of. So there is a Massachusetts Planners list serve where you can essentially pose any question via email, whether it be about demo delays or historic districts or really anything. And I just kind of posed the question to the group of how they thought demo delays were going in their town, if they had them, what they would change if they could, and got some feedback. So figured I would just pass it along to you guys.
Yeah, did you circulate that to everybody?
I did.
Yeah, okay. I mean, if this is one of the substantive things we decide to add in the spring or wait to the fall, that it really doesn't matter, but we can look at that stuff and make some decisions. I got the gist of it that some people said longer time rather than a shorter time. And again, the issue of incentivizing it, because I got the sense from quickly reading those email responses that a lot of developers, A, just wait this out, or B, they're still going to do what they want to do. The time isn't a factor to them and they wait. And, you know, unless they're incentivized to save an old building, they're not going to do it. So we'll look at that when we get to it. All right, so the decision 3 and deliverable 3, well, we got deliverable 3 today. So we got the KP changes to 112.13. Then we got deliverable 4. We have to make a decision on the organization of definitions. I think we settled that my idea is not out, and we'll just do straight alphabetical. This is place 2 where members of the committee, it's not just KP, not just my proposal. If anybody on the committee has suggestions of definitions to either get rid of, amend, or add that we don't have, now would be the time to bring those forward for discussion. The discussion on the definitions and the uses, I think those are tied together, as I mentioned further down here. I think that'll come later, probably our December meeting and into our January meeting. That's where we're going to have some. The table of uses is going to take a lot of work and discussion. You know, I'm looking at the meeting on the 30th of being setting the organizational structure, probably settling on the changes to Articles 1 and 12. Then we need to spend a lot of time on definitions and the table of uses. Going further down, decision 8, deliverable 6, do we want to bring in any other substantive changes? And I just mentioned a few of the hot topics. Again, none of those are a burning issue that requires action in the spring, at least not at the moment. But if we have something ready to go, we could make some substantive changes in the spring as well. On the sidetrack, we have our regulations. We had decided to move a lot of stuff out of the regulation, out of the bylaw into regulations. We just need to make the final decisions on the format of that. Since I'm proposing a single source compilation of all land use regulations, it's time to bring the other boards into it. If they don't want to do it that way, then the planning board is just reorganizing regulations for the zoning bylaw. And, you know, we and the planning board can do that on a separate track. And like Dave mentioned earlier, we can either pass new regulations in anticipation that town meeting is going to agree with moving them out of the bylaw into regulations, or we have them ready to go for the day after town meeting.
Tom?
But that's on a separate track.
Tom, can I,
Yeah, so I'm going to open it up to anybody thoughts on this schedule, but that's really, given that the bylaws should be drafted, the warrant article should be drafted by February, late February. We have a lot of things to do between now and then.
okay. So one of the things that I think we should be cognizant about is that we're moving into something that is very significant. We kind of had a crash and burn 2 years ago. So the things that are likely to create a little bit of a storm, like single lot exemption, which I'm in favor of, by the way, but we may want to get the first thing that we bring to town meeting, have a solid win under our belt. And I think once we do that, that will, for some of the people who are just kind of knuckle draggers on this, that will kind of take a little bit of the wind out of their sails. So when we decide how we want to go forward, we want to make sure that we would have some very good things. I think the regulation issue is something we could, get behind, because I think people are going to support that. They're going to notice that. That makes, so,
wanna
whatever
build
we
trust.
decide to do.
You want to build trust with simple stuff.
Exactly. I want to
makes
get a good
sense.
solid win and get some momentum. So when we make this decision, and this is the decision of the committee to make, not my decision, but that's one of the things that I would say politically would be very helpful.
Well, we are in a position that, Cassie's not here, but we can make a decision right now and not wait till the 30th and say, we're going to go forward in the spring with just organizational stuff. And I think, uses is not just organizational, it's substantive if we're simplifying the table. But I do think that needs to come forward soon. It's really tied to the definitions, so they kind of go together. But yeah, let's do that. I mean, and I don't think
it's your call. It's your call.
Yeah, no, I don't think that
guideline.
I don't think the changes in definitions or simplifying the table of uses should be uber controversial. But if the thought is not to risk any of the reorganization part of it, which is the cornerstone of the whole project, and not bring in anything about ADUs, inclusionary zoning, anything of substance beyond the first 4 articles, I'm okay with that. And we can make that decision tonight to proceed on that basis and let town council know.
I think we can
substantive issues might be timely for a spring town meeting, and I wouldn't take it off the table. The important thing is that if it's substantial or of substance, then, and it's thoroughly vetted and tweaked and modified so that it works as a shining example of how you craft bylaws and run them up the flagpole and get them past the town meeting, then I think that it speaks to what Jack is talking about.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean,
if we have a win-win,
life isn't risk-free, but if we have a thorough process, I think we shouldn't eliminate substantive changes.
I agree. That's
exactly.
Yeah, substantive isn't the issue. I think there's a difference between housekeeping, substantive, and controversial. I think there's a spectrum there. And so when, there's substantive things that won't cause a ripple, but then there's substantive things that could be an all-out war, at town meeting, which is fine. But I think any of whatever is brought up that's substantive needs to have at least been a part of the forums, or have been socialized and get the people's input on before any decisions are made. So like when we get to the residential stuff, when you're talking single lot exemption, when you're talking about the frontage, side yard requirements, things like that, I mean, there needs to be a forum on that, on residential stuff before that gets brought to any town meeting. So
no, let's not kid us. The fall town meeting will be controversial because there will be changes that are going to be you know, the whole point of this is that the table of area dimensional regulations hasn't been changed since 1986. That's where we were looking. That's where the working group was focusing on change. But I agree. Let's not foreclose anything, but we've always discussed it in terms of, with this town meeting, the low hanging fruit. So if there is some low hanging change,
Yeah,
like,
that makes sense.
for example, if the Affordable Energy Committee says, okay, we agree with town council and here's a quick rewrite of the solar and wind bylaw. Okay, fine, we can do that. Inclusionary zoning, the only suggestion that's on there at the moment is to create a formula for doing fees in lieu. Now, my edit tries to de-emphasize fees in lieu, but you know, we can decide the single lot exemption is probably falls under the controversial category.
Right.
And when we did do in the working group a test run of it, and we're going to bring it forward for the fall 21 town meeting, what we got caught up on was some of the research and the statistics of how many lots would be impacted by it.
Right.
And the data was gathered from the assessor's office, who categorize properties in a slightly different way than you do in the real property world, or the zoning world. So we initially thought that maybe there was 76 lots impacted, but it turned out it might, and I emphasize might, been 200 plus. So that is data that I think we had better have nailed down. You know, the ZBA can recommend which direction.
And it's very important to understand that the visceral feeling that people have when they think they have something, that the single lot exemption helps them to preserve in terms of value, the fear of losing that for some of these people, when in fact the Mass General Laws still provides them some flexibility. So we have to be prepared for people's feelings and facts.
Yeah, I mean, one of the lead citizens who spoke at our public meeting, and the working group was discussing that article, you know, he's using his property as an example and the fear that he was losing something. Well, we didn't have a quick answer off the top of our heads, but on further research, his property would not get the benefit of either the town's single lot exemption or the state single lot exemption. So research is critical, because a lot of people operate on fear and not knowing.
That's right. Fear of the unknown. Sure.
We saw that nationwide yesterday. That's my political comment for the night. So, okay.
I haven't seen what happened. What happened? Was it good or bad?
No, it's a mixed bag, but you know, how people can vote for certain people is beyond, but that's another story. So,
we'll talk about that over a beer sometime.
I do noticed in Massachusetts that not one of the Trumpster statewide candidates even came close to 40% of the vote, which is a big contrast to the rest of the country. But anyway, I digress. I digress. All right. Yeah. So, all right. So we've gone through those two memos. I appreciate that. You know, be ready for our meetings, the final two meetings of this year, and the meetings in January to be where we get into some real meat for the Springtown meeting and have all that ready. Clark, again, you're on for the next forum. I'd like to have your materials to Lauren by the Thanksgiving. We'll nail down Tom Bell. So now I distributed documents about Articles 3 and 4. I don't think if with your agreement, we will not discuss those until we actually get into them over the next few meetings in decision making. On the districts, you know, I don't think KP had a lot of changes. My changes are proposed are consolidation of the commercial districts. We've already talked about the harbor at length. You know, we have waterfront business, downtown business, light industry, and the overlay. And we have one property that's commercially used, but it's in the Residence B. Just like to take those 5 and just put them in the one district. The 3A consolidate the commercial districts. And then I think 3A, the decision is are we going to make some kind of overlay or, allowing for mixed use or residential use on 3A. Again, without reference to the MBTA thing, but, on our own terms. Proposing no changes to the residential districts, at least the naming of them or the boundaries of them at this time. But so Article 3 should be something we can easily deal with. But for the table of uses and for extensive comments from KP that everybody should look at and absorb. And I haven't seen, one of their deliverables is they got to come up with some actual suggested changes to the table. They've made a number of suggestions about how things should be divided within that table. Then there's my very simplistic table. So somewhere we got to meld all those together. I think that's probably going to take at least a full meeting just by itself. And then the definitions will follow from that. So that's
Yeah,
probably
Tom, on
something-
3 and 4, if you could, I read it, but if you could put on the next agenda as well, as we talk about it. So when we have the full crew, we can make some decisions about it too.
Yeah, so looking forward on the meeting, our next meeting on November 30th, let's anticipate that we're going to decide finally on the organizational issue. How many articles are we going, following our current model, following the Concord model, or are we going to hybrid something in between? And then we will get into settling on the text of Articles 1, 12, and 13, whether they are combined in my proposal or kept separate in KP's proposal. We might, depending on the timing of that, we may get into Article 3, since that's a simple one. And then we can, the meeting on December 19th and probably the first one in January is where we'll spend most of our time on Article 4 and the table of uses, and then the definitions that flow from that. And again, anybody who has any suggestions, it's not just KP's version versus my version. Anybody else who has suggestions on any of these articles, please do so. But the deliverables are to have them by our next meeting on November 30th, or at least by December 19th. All right. We have minutes to approve of October 26th. Can I have a motion? If anybody looked at them?
Yes, I printed them out. I make a motion that we approve the minutes of October the 26th.
Second,
All right, roll call. Clark,
Mark Brewer, aye.
Tom Callahan, aye.
David Frog, aye.
Jack Creighton, aye.
Okay. Any other issues not on the agenda that anyone wants to bring up, not anticipated before this meeting? And Jack, I'll give you an opportunity. 1 second, Clark. We'll go back to just one of Jack. You weren't here when we discussed it, but did you have any specific takeaway? At the risk you might repeat what David and I said, do you have any takeaways from the forum the other night? Because you were there as well.
No, I just thought that the one thing that I would say is that when like David was there, and if members of this committee are there, we should at least recognize them. But beyond that, I thought it was well run. Tom, you did an excellent job. I think it was very professional, and I think what it's showing is the people who are watching saw that this is being handled in a serious manner. And when the people who are opposed throw their nonsense stuff, we will have proved by that this is very serious. So well done, Tom, and the other members too.
Yeah, no, I tried to keep my own participation to the bare minimum, as I will at the next one, other than I might talk about land alteration. But I think Lauren did an excellent presentation of a lot of material condensed into a pretty quick presentation.
Yes.
As I said earlier, the Affordable Housing Committee's chair and vice chair did a good job doing their summary, and I thought Woody was excellent. I told him
Yes,
because he really gave a fair, both sides consideration of the ADU bylaw and what
Mhm.
direction we go in. The MAPC people are more helpful than I think, so having, I think her name is, what was her name? Now it escaped me. She
Lydia.
was great. What was it?
Lydia.
Lydia, that's right, Lydia. She was great having there as a backup to ask specific state-related questions. And again, I talked to them that night about somebody for the climate one, and I think we'll get somebody. And as long as they're not charging us for it, we should avail ourselves of their services as much as possible. And I noted earlier, I don't know if you noticed it, Jack, particularly on the Zoom. We had Mark Dunn again, who goes under his wife's name on Zoom.
Yes, right.
And Mike Dick. So, we're getting a lot of the same people who are participating and taking a real interest in this, which I thought was good
Right.
to see. So, all right, Clark, a new matter you wanted to bring up?
Oh, no, I was going to make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right. Clark, you feel better. Cassie, if you're out there, I hope the
Thank you.
child feels better with everything that's going on. All right, so we all have some subcommittee assignments. We have some deliverables.
Whoever's not here, we should volunteer for anything that wasn't picked up.
Yes, absolutely. However, I'm going to call the motion.
All right. So all in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. Thank you all. Thank you, Cassandra.
Good
for
night.
being
Good work,
here.
Tom.
All right,
Hey,
thank you.
Cassandra, thank you. You're really helping us.
Great, thank you.